Hello there, Pixel Pushers. Sadiq Hussain here with another tutorial with Affinity Photo. Now, this time we've had a special request in about selecting an object, in this case these two dogs sitting on the carpet. Of course, you can see that the room's got some furniture, we've got some shadows, and we've got an item here poking out from the front at the bottom here. And what we want to do is to have a uniform background. Now, the ideal thing would have been if the dogs were on a large carpeted area in a room with no furniture, and then in which case there'll be very little to do to it. But what we've got here, because we've got the surrounding furniture, the best thing to do is to select the objects. So using the selection tool, which we'll go through, and then placing them on whatever background that we want. Now, I have done this already, so I'm just going to show you the potential end results, then I'll go through with you step at a time. So for example, we've got, if we disable this layer on the right hand side, that's the selected layer with nothing behind it. It's got a shadow underneath it through effects, which we'll show you, and then behind it now we can place a graduated background layer, or we can put a sampled carpet texture layer that's slightly blurred, or we can put using a brush sampled again from the carpet texture as the background. Now, whichever one works for you, you can obviously try different backgrounds. The key thing is to select the foreground first. Okay, so this is the original image that we're starting with, that we're going to be editing. Okay, so let's start with that first. Okay, so let's start with this then, and as you know, if you've seen my other videos, I prefer the selection brush tool. So if we go to the selection brush tool, increase or decrease the size of the brush, and just select your object initially just loosely. We don't really want to worry too much about the selection at this stage, because we're going to refine it as I've described to you before. Okay, that's reasonably. We're not going to select the shadow, because in fact this room has got 2 or 3 shadows, because presumably there were 2 or 3 different lights at different positions, and you can see down here there's a shadow here and there's a lighter shadow there. So we're not going to worry too much about the shadows. We'll add our own shadow, uniform shadow. Actually, that selected the dogs fairly well, and what we need to do now is to refine that selection using your scroll wheel. Zoom in and out as you need to, click refine, and click refine. I had the wrong layer selected there, so the top layer there, so just make sure that it's the layer that you want to work with that is selected. Click refine. Okay, so now we've got that matte, easily done. So always bear in mind, I was wondering why the matte selection hadn't shown, which is that light red color. Okay, so now what the key thing here is about refining the selection. Okay, so zoom in using the selection brush, and what we're doing is essentially going over the edges, and because we got the fur, we want to make sure that that is selected accurately. So do each section at a time, and this is just the first pass, so to speak. So space key down, and then enables you to move with the hand tool the image around rather than zooming in and out all the time. So just do that around the edges. This is a little bit of a pixelated image, purely because it's a low res image taken on a mobile phone, my understanding, and so therefore you do need to bear that in mind. But obviously the principle will apply no matter what. But if you do zoom in and you start seeing it's pixelated and you wonder why that is, it's because it's a relatively low resolution image. the source image is low resolution. Okay, so I'm just going to go round the edges like that. So we're fine selecting it. There'll be some more cleaning up afterwards. That's all okay. That's all okay. We could just do that there. So essentially telling the software to resample the edges to make sure everything's okay like that there by the toes. Okay. Now we don't want that shadow there. Okay, but we'll come back to that. I'm just going to refine the selection first. Okay, that's all okay there. I think that's all okay there. I'm just scanning the edges to see if there's an area where it hasn't quite selected it properly, and I'm just helping it along. Oops. If I do it, if I did that incorrectly, and then just go one step on the history palette. Okay, so there we go. So a little bit there. Okay, so that area there needs clean up. I think we're almost there. Okay. And a little bit there. And we just want to make sure that the edges of the fur are all done. Now we've been round all the way round and we've done that, and I'm happy with that. So the rest of the refining we can do differently. Okay, so we could go to foreground and background on these tabs here and just refine it, but it's actually selected it quite well. What we now want to do is output that selection on a new layer. Okay, so output on a new layer. So as soon as we've done that, what we'll get is similar to what we've got at the top here, but I'm showing you each of these steps at a time. So let's just have a look at what we've just selected. And if you go through now and actually go round, you can see there's some shadows and some rogue pixels that we want to get rid of. And if we now use the eraser tool, and let's choose an appropriate brush. I was using a different brush earlier, which you'll see. Let's just pick a reasonably small brush, but with a feathered edge. Okay, so really what we're doing is that layer selected, which is what we've just selected and saved onto a new layer, and then all I'm doing is takes the time, but this will really help to make the effect work, is taking off these rogue shadow pixels, and it's just a question of increasing and decreasing the size of the brush, so you can go around and take out as much. Try not to eat into the image itself, and all these, you might not notice these as you go around and put a shadow on, but then again you might, so it's worth taking out certainly the bulk of them. And when you want to get into like this area with the toes, what you want is to have a small brush. You can see the image pixelating now. As I said to you, it's an image taken on a mobile phone some time ago, not by me, I hasten to add, but by a friend, and they've requested for this video to be done, and I thought, well, if I do it, then other people can benefit from it as well. And obviously apply the same techniques, but to whatever subject. It could be a child, it could be an object, it could be anything in the home, anything at all. The principle will apply, and that is replacing the background by selecting the foreground that you want to keep, and then adding a new background. And of course that will be the second stage, is adding a foreground. Okay, so at the moment we're cleaning up these rogue pixels. We could have done this fine-tuning in the fine-tune section of the selection brush, but really what I wanted to show you is that there are more than one way of doing the same thing, and we have done selection brush before. I'll put a link in the description, and you'll see that. So I don't want to repeat myself. I want to show you how to get to the same end result, but with a different tool or a different technique. Okay, so again, zooming in and out, changing the size of the brush, and we're just doing a clean up job. Okay, remember we zoomed in quite a lot here, so a slight sort of irregularity in your pixels isn't the end of the world, because you won't notice it. But of course, if you want to take the time and literally do it pixel at a time, although that's unlikely, but if you wanted to, of course, you could. So here we go, and all this needs just cleaning up. So these are sort of semi-transparent pixels. It's really the remnant of the shadow, and because we're adding our own shadow to it afterwards, which as you saw earlier is pretty effective. What you don't want is for the actual shadow to overlay that, so it's always a good idea to remove, if not all of it, certainly most of it. Okay, so we need we don't want to take these feathering bits out up here, so it's really, you don't want to be taking all those little hairs out. We want to keep those, and it's just the rogue pixels which are the shadows. You can probably just about a bit of hair strand there, so you don't want to get rid of that. Bit of fur rather. It could be hair, of course, if it was a human. Okay, and that's it. We don't want to get rid of that hair, fur there at the top there. Here, sort of like a lion's mane. Okay, so that's that part of it done. I think that's a shadow there, so we want to get rid of that. Okay, so Command and 0 just to have full screen. So that's great. That's exactly what we've done up here. Okay, so I'm actually going to disable that layer. I'm going to delete that layer. That's the original one that I selected, and that's what we've selected now. Okay, that's our selection now, so I'm going to move it to the top. And what I want to apply at this stage is a shadow, a drop shadow. Okay, now here, actually, I'm just going to delete that little bit there. Just notice that little bit. Okay, I'm going to apply it, and then quick way to, there's 2-3 different ways of doing a drop shadow. Again, I've done a video about doing a drop shadow on another subject, so I'll link to that one in the description. Have a look at that, but this is a different way of doing it. So as long as that selected layer, what we've selected, the object, that layer is selected, we click on the effects tab here, which is in the layers by the layers palette, and what we want to do is to click on shadow, outer shadow here. Okay, click this gear icon just to pull that out, and what we want to do is add a shadow to it. Okay, so how big is the shadow? How much offset is it away from? Because if you do the offset a lot, you can see the shadow very clearly, and so radius really makes it a little bit blurry. You can see that the edges of the shadow is blurring. You don't want a sharp shadow, but you got to remember is where's the light coming from. So these dogs are in a room, so just the lights from the ceiling or from the wall, so the lights are not far, So in which case the shadows are not going to be very, very feathered at the edges. So you don't want it to be like that, because it wouldn't look natural. If they were outdoors and it was a shadow on the ground or on the grass, then that would be suitable. But really we're looking at sort of a little bit of a feathered edge to it, but not too much. It's offset too much, so I'm just going to bring that back a little bit. Okay, because the original image, the feathering, the shadow, sorry, wasn't that offset. Now, question is, where do we want where's the light coming from? Okay, so you find out where the light is coming from and make sure that the shadow is in the appropriate place. Now, because I'd already done this before, in fact, if I close this and go back to the layers palette and we just select that image, because I know that the light's coming from the top right here because of the way the shadows are falling here. Can you see the shadows are falling? So what I want to replicate, not that it makes any difference, but it does help to sell the picture, because the way the light falls on the body of the animal, of the dog in this case, it means that you want the shadow to fall in the same direction. So we're roughly looking from top right to bottom left, top right to bottom left. So if I just disable that layer again, it's always good for reference to keep that. So click on the FX option again, so you can open up that where we were, and I just want to position that so that the drop shadow is in the right place. I think I could probably make it a little bit more offset, and not the radius. I think that's fine. I'm happy with that. So click close. So we've now got a cutout layer and we've got a drop shadow. So now what we want to do is add a background. Now these backgrounds I've already prepared, but I'm going to prepare one from scratch. So if we go to layer, new fill layer, okay, now that fill layer is at the top, so let's leave it at the top for now, and we want to add not a solid fill. Might be a good idea to fill with a radial gradient, and then click on here to change the colors of the gradient. So in the one section, I don't want it to be white. Perhaps I want it to be sort of a browny color, because that was the general color of the carpet. So maybe we could have it quite sort of light in the one area, and then on the other node we might want it to be let's go back to where we were, a little bit darker. Okay, and so what we want to do is we're still on the gradient tool. I'm going to find the center. There we go, and just click and drag outwards into the corner. So by clicking and dragging, we've got a gradient going from light brown to dark brown. And again, if you want to change that, and we want that dark brown to be dark yellow to be a slightly different shade, we can do that here, more of a mustard color. Okay, let's say we're happy with that as one example. And if we just move this selected dogs layer and just move it up above that background, so now straight away what we've got is dogs cut out with their appropriate drop shadow on a neutral background. Okay, if you don't like that background, just click on the background and change it again, exactly the same way, using the gradient tool here on the left, which we've got a video on as well. Again, I'll put a link in the description so you can go and have a look at that. And you can change that. It won't affect the dogs because that's not the layer we've got selected, it's that one. So again, I'll demonstrate it to you. We might want not a radial blur, but we might want a linear blur. So a linear blur means that it goes in a straight line, and maybe it's darker at the top and lighter at the bottom. So maybe you want a gradient like this. Sorry, did I say blur earlier? I meant gradient. So a linear gradient. And again, if you want different colors, you can still do it at this stage. Each of these nodes represent these nodes here. So if it's the lighter node that you want to change, click on that, then on the color, and then change it, and you can see that it'll change at the bottom. I actually quite like it, nice light. And then at the top one, if you go to the darker one, and maybe I don't want it that mustardy color, maybe I want it more orangey, or maybe actually I want it more like the color of the dog. So if I click on the selection tool and click on the dog for, say, that color, and then press that little swatch button, so that's that color selected now. Now you don't want it to be exactly the same color as the dog, because otherwise the dogs or the object won't stand out. So you'd want to vary it slightly. So you just move this slider, so you're in the ballpark, but you might want to change it so that it's easier to see. So maybe something like that. And actually what might be a good idea is that if I choose the lighter color, not to be the color we had before, but we actually use the color picker, and we choose the dog's fur here, the black dog, and then click on that circular swatch node, and so now what we've got is a color that matches the bottom dog, and then a color that matches the top dog. Now you might not like that look, but that's the way to do it. In the center point, where the two colors meld together, you move with this center point here, this slider, and you can just do that. You can see that it's predominantly gray fading to brown, or predominantly brown fading to gray. So you choose what looks good. I actually think that sort of looks quite good. Okay, I didn't do that before, so I actually quite like that. So that's putting a gradient, a linear gradient or a radial gradient on a new layer, and then position that layer just below the cutout layer. Now the last thing to do is to do another new layer, and this time with this, on this new layer, make sure that layer selected, we want to use a brush on it and paint a texture on it. So go back to the original layer, because we want to sample that. So disable all the other layers and just enable that layer. Okay, and what we want to do is use the selection tool, and the freehand selection tends to work. Choose a part of the carpet that you want to select. I chose this one around here earlier. Let me choose a slightly different area, and all I'm going to do is just draw just a rough selection. Doesn't matter about the shape of the carpet. Once it's selected, have a look whether you've feathered it or not, and it's always a good idea to have the selection feathered a little bit. I've got it feathered by 17 pixels, but you might want to change that, so let's just make sure that's feathered. Once that's done, then while that's selected, if you go to the brushes palette here on the top, and right in the corner you got these three dots, it's the sub menu, and we want to say new brush from selection. The selection it means is this selection here. So new brush from selection, and there you go, it's created a new brush, and this is a faster method of doing it. It doesn't give you the same amount of control of creating your custom brushes, but we'll look at that in the dedicated video that I mentioned earlier that we'll do. Okay, so now we can change the properties of the brush here. Okay, so whether you would just want to do it as a single spot brush, or whether you want to change the nature of what the brush looks like. All of these will help really to make the use of the brush look either uniform or random. So you can maybe try that. Again, a lot of this is you try and see what works for you. Okay, this is all about how the brush is going to behave. Now that I've sampled it and created the new brush, it's in the general brushes section, the basic brushes section, but I'll show you in a moment how to move that into a custom category. If I now enable that fill layer that we just created, that layer, there's nothing on it. Okay, we just went to layer and new layer, didn't we? So there's nothing on it. So now we go to the brush tool on the left hand side, because we're going to paint with that brush that we sampled. Okay, you can see that the brush looks like the actual sample that we've got, and now all we're going to do is paint with it, and because we randomize the brush, it's going to randomly give us a pattern. Now you can keep going over it to find what works for you. Don't overdo it, but let's say we're happy with that. Okay, and we want the dogs to be sitting on that. Just turn the dogs layer on, the selected object, and bang, it's done. Now if you want to tweak this layer, you can do, because what we might want to do is to maybe blur that pattern selection, that brush that we used. So we just go into the effects, like that layer selected, click into effects, and just collapse these, and we want Gaussian blur. Okay, so all we do is just blur it a little bit. If we blur it a lot, it almost becomes press preserve alpha, because if you click preserve alpha, it means those edges there they get filled in as well, which is what you want. Okay, so it doesn't leave any semi-transparent pixels. Now if you blur it completely, that's almost non-recognizable as a texture. You might as well just fill it with a color, but having a little bit of a blur sometimes helps to take away from the mottled effect, but that's entirely your choice. If that's what you want to do, you can blur it. Okay, so that's using the selection brush, selecting your object, putting a drop shadow, refining that selection, putting a drop shadow behind it, and then putting it on a selection of different backgrounds. So we've got that background, we've got that fill background, which is really effective actually, and these are the other backgrounds that are done, and I can just show you what they look like. Okay, so we'll leave it on that one. That's the job done. And of course, if you wanted to adjust the whole image for put an adjustment layer on, like brightness or contrast, color overlay, that's entirely you can do that afterwards. As long as you put that adjustment layer at the top of the layer stack, it will affect everything. If you only to affect the dogs, then you just put it above the dogs, but then attach it by grouping those two layers together. Okay, so I hope you found that useful. Do give it a go. Well, finally, I said that I would show you how to move a brush that you've created. If it's because we've got different categories of brushes, and I've already got a category called custom brushes, which you can create by clicking that menu again and create new category, and then name it. But if I want to move that brush from here now, which is in the basics category, I just highlight it, right click it, move brush to which category do I want to move. I want to move it to custom brushes, and bang, it's gone out of that. And if I go to custom brushes, you'll find that it's here right down the bottom. It will always be the last one that I've the last brush in that row, in that list, and so there it is there, and these are other previous ones that I've done as well. Okay, there you go. Have a go at that. Do give me some feedback and leave me some comments. That'd be really appreciated. And of course, once you get the technique right, you can use it on any object. It's just a question of refining the selection and creating a suitable background on which to put it. Okay, thank you very much.